Okay, my name is Bill Bernhardt, and I prepared a short video presentation, hopefully short, a short summary on the Guild classical guitars from the early 60s through the 70s and early 80s. So this presentation format is broken down into several areas. I want to share some background information, talk a little about Carlo Greco and Mark Dronge, give some thanks to some other folks that helped me with this, and then share some details on the guitars themselves, and follow up at the end with some miscellaneous information. All right, so the background information. Carlo Greco was a world-renowned luthier. He helped start the design of the Mark Classicals back in the early 60s, and they were named after Albert Dronge's son, Mark. So there's various Mark models, a Mark I through a Mark VII, and they were made from 1961 through 1987 in two factories, Hoboken, New Jersey, and Westerly, Rhode Island. And just some information there on when they were made. Basically, I just want to highlight that the Mark I, II, and III were the student models, and the 4, 5, and 6 were the more fancier models, and the Mark VII was a custom order or an artist special model, a derivative of the Mark VI. And again, they were made from roughly 1961 through 1987, with some of them being discontinued earlier. Most of them had spruce tops with 25.5-inch scale length, and some examples were made with cedar. And I just highlight one famous player, a jazz player named Charlie Bird. He played a Mark VI for a number of years. All right, this slide shows some about Carlo Greco. Now, he was the original designer of the Guild Mark Classicals along with his team. He was a shop foreman in the workshop at the Guild factory in Hoboken, New Jersey, and he was instrumental in the design and initial construction of the Guild classical guitars. He personally made the Mark V's and Mark VI's. Here he's shown with a picture of one of the Mark VII's from the early 70s. And what makes the Guild Mark Classicals different is, in my opinion, they're the best American-made classical guitars. They set up, they're comparable to Martin, Gibson, Favilla, and Gretsch, which all made fine guitars, but Guild stands out because they're due to the Spanish tradition, the Torres fan brace design, and the traditional body shape that the Guild Marks have. And you can see some pictures here of Carlo building some of the classicals back in the day. Here's some pictures of Carlo Greco that Luigi Greco gave to me to share. And here it shows him at a young age at the Hoboken, New Jersey factory there on the upper left. And then some other pictures of him working on guitars in his New York City shop back in the 70s or the 80s and 90s and so forth. Here's just a few more slides or pictures of Carlo in his shop in New York City, and also a promotional photo of him representing Guild in one of their catalogs. I had the opportunity to correspond with Mark Dronge. Now, he's Alfred Dronge's son, and he's the namesake for the Guild Mark classical guitars. And I was asking him here in this email about the Mark VII's and whether he knew anything about them. And he heard of them, but he never actually played one, which is interesting. And he was instrumental in fashioning the Guild line throughout the years with his father and family. But he eventually started his own business marketing guitar strings as well later in his life. Here you see Mark Dronge presenting John Lennon with the Guild Starfire 12 guitar, electric guitar, to him there back in I guess the 60s, but pretty cool picture. Well, before I get into the details on the Guild classical guitars, I wanted to thank a few people. Hans Moos, who's a Guild historian who wrote the Guild guitar book, Luigi Greco for some of the pictures of Carlo and Mark Dronge. I also want to thank some other folks, Mike Halloran and Mark Brogley and Tom Cummings. They're all Guild classical guitar players and collectors and historians as well. So I thank all those folks. And if you're interested in the Guild company, the Guild guitar book from Hans Moos is the main resource, as well as old catalogs and websites there. The Let's Talk Guild website and the Martin unofficial Martin Guitar Forum are good websites to learn about the Guild classical guitars. And check out my YouTube channel under my name. All right, this here shows a complete family of Guild classical guitars, and a couple of the models I have extra there. Now, I don't have all these guitars anymore, but I do want to share each one with you. And what you see here is a complete listing from a Mark 1 to a Mark 7. I have a 63 Mark 1 here, a 69 Mark 2, a 78 Mark 3, a 73 Mark 4, three Mark 5s. Two of them are 64s. One's a maple and a Brazilian rosewood. There's an 80 Mark 5 there. And on the right side is a 61 and a 68 Mark 6, as well as one Gibson in there, a C500. And in the center, that's the 70 Mark 7. I also show some literature on the lower right and a wooden guitar Solero that actually Carlo Greco used, the body mold for the classicals. And on the wall is some old catalog pages as well. The next two slides show the 63 Guild Mark 1 in some detail. Now this is the Guild Mark 1 is called the chocolate guitar because it's all mahogany, Honduran mahogany. And this particular example came to me from up in near Boston, Massachusetts. I also owned a 64 Mark 1 for a little while. And these are a wonderful classical guitar with a deep sounding bass because of the all Honduran mahogany construction. Here's some more pictures of the 63 Guild Mark 1. Again, the beautiful Honduran mahogany you can see there. Now the Guild Mark 2, this one's a 69 Mark 2. I actually owned also an 86 and a 75 for some time. These are a nice, wonderful beginner's guitar, kind of like a student model. Very similar to the Mark 1, except it has a spruce top. You can see some more slides here of the Mark II, 69 Mark II, spruce top with the Honduran mahogany back and sides. Both the Mark I and the Mark II came in the matte finish, matte satin finish as well. All right, now we're moving to the Mark III. This is a 73, or 78 Mark III, I should say. I actually owned also a 62 Mark III and a 79 Mark III for a little while, but this particular model, the Mark III, the 78, this guitar is a guitar I personally started out with, and it's basically been with me pretty much all my adult life. So it's a cedar top with a Peruvian mahogany, which is a step above the Honduran mahogany, Mark I and Mark II. All right, the slides here show the 78 Mark III in a little more detail. The Mark III is the start of the glossier finishes. Again, this one's a cedar top with Peruvian mahogany back and sides. All right, this slide starts the Mark IVs, and this example is a 73 Guild Mark IV. And the Mark IVs are interesting because they're the model that starts the professional models because of the tone woods. They all came with ebony fretboards, but the Mark IVs have a variation of tone woods. They came in Indian and Brazilian rosewood. They came in flame pearwood, which is the most common. They came in maple, and this example is African padauk, which is a rare version as well. They started in 73. I also read about ash, but I never seen one. Again, here's some pictures of the 73 Guild Mark IV with African padauk. Look at the beautiful grains of the wood you can see there. The padauk is similar to a maple or a rosewood, but it sounds different from both. All right, now Mark V, that's I have three examples to share with you here. This is the 80 Guild Mark V. This one was made in November of 1980. This is a beautiful example from Wesley, Rhode Island, and it's East Indian rosewood back and sides. Yeah, the Mark V here, you can see the Indian rosewood back and sides, a beautiful guitar. Spruce top with Indian rosewood back and sides. All the Mark Vs came again, just like the Mark IVs, with ebony fretboards and rosewood bridges. Here's an older Mark V. This was from 64. It came to me with a broken top, a crack on the top, but I repaired that. I refretted it, got it playable, and this is a wonderful example from early Hoboken, New Jersey. Again, it's Brazilian rosewood back and sides with a spruce top. Here's some more detail, the 64 Guild Mark V. Beautiful Brazilian rosewood back and sides with a spruce top. Ebony fretboard and a Brazilian rosewood bridge. Guild Mark V's, they came in both Indian or Brazilian rosewood as well as flame maple. And I have an example of a flame maple Mark V to show. This one was made in April of 1964. It came from Texas, but it was known from Hans Moos had it in his database of Guild classical guitars and said this was made in April 9th, 1964. The interesting thing about this Mark V, again, it's flame maple back and sides, but it does not have a Spanish foot like most of the Mark V's do. It has a dovetail joint, and but it's a beautiful example. Again, here you can see the flame maple back and the top. In this particular picture of the spruce top, someone put flamenco tap plates on. I have since removed the plates, but it's a nice old flame maple example. They only made less than 100 of these, is my guess. Now we're into the Mark VIs, and the Mark VIs are just a wonderful example of Guild craftsmanship. This particular guitar is a 61 Guild Mark VI. This is the first year of production. This guitar was handmade by Carlo Greco, and it came to me from down in Dallas, Texas. But it's a wonderful guitar. It's spruce top with Indian rosewood back and sides. Again, here's some pictures of the top and the back. Again, spruce top, ebony fretboard, inlays in the ebony bridge in this case, and Indian rosewood back and sides. This Mark VI from 1968 is Brazilian rosewood. It's a spruce top with Brazilian rosewood back and sides. Came to me from the New York and New Jersey area. Again, here you can see the top is spruce and the back is beautiful Brazilian rosewood. It's got an ebony fretboard, again inlays in the bridge as well, pearl inlays. Now I want to share some on the Guild Mark VII, the 70. This is an example from 1970. This guitar came to me from Texas as well, and Hans Moos verified this particular serial number as one of the 10 Guild Mark VIIs. The Guild Mark VII is kind of the holy grail for collectors of Guild Mark classical guitars because they only made several of them, up to 10 of them. Some people say a little bit more than that, but 10 of them were documented at least. And this guitar is interesting because the owner I got it off of, before he owned it, it came to someone out in California, San Francisco area, and that owner took it to a luthier, and the label was floating around inside, and he glued it back on, and it was a Mark VII. I couldn't believe it. And when the next owner purchased it, something inside, either some kind of insect, ate away at the label, and what you see there is the remnants of the label. But the serial number is also on the Spanish foot inside, and Hans Moos was able to verify that serial number back then, and this one was built in 1970. It came from the special Brazilian rosewood that Carlo Greco held back just for the Mark VIIs. Here's a few more pictures of it with a detail on the label. You can see the 7, the 2 numerals for Mark VII in there, and some pictures of it there. Here's the back of it. Again, a spruce top. It has ivory inlaid saddle tie block there. And the back is this 200-year-old Brazilian rosewood that you can see. All right, so I shared some examples of all the models from Mark I to Mark VII. Now I want to share just a couple slides on some miscellaneous information on the Guild classical guitars. Here's another picture of Carlo Greco in his home workshop, I should say, and a picture of me when I was younger playing at my sister's wedding with my Guild Mark III. All right, the Mark VII information. Again, they only made 10 of these, and I was able to locate through basic internet research serial numbers on 9 out of the 10. So there's only one missing that I'm aware of. Here's some pictures of some of them. And Tom Cummings there holding one that he wasn't able to get me the serial number on that particular example. But the Mark 7, there's 10 of them all throughout. And my example is CF211. Here's a slide on the Mark 7 that Carlo Greco was holding earlier in this presentation. This is CF243, one of the finest guitars that several people owned. And Mike Holleran there wrote some information there for you to read. Basically, it talks about the rosewood came from a 200-year-old log at that point, and they also made John Denver's 12-string guitar out of the same Brazilian rosewood log. But again, just a beautiful classical guitar. So here's some more detail on my particular Mark 7 that Hans Most talked about. He mentioned that the tuners on one side, the treble side, the screws were replaced, which is true. My screws on that side are replaced. It also had a weird burn mark or weird spot he talks about on it, and I have that weird spot. You can see it as well. So it was interesting that several people were familiar with the CF211 before I purchased it. I just want to talk a little about the Guild labels from back in the 60s primarily. And like I said, there's 7 models, a Mark 1 through a Mark 7. The typical labels and serial numbers were started like with alphabetic letters. And the CA stands for a Mark 1, a CB stands for a Mark 2, CC a Mark 3, a CD for a Mark 4, a CE for Mark 5, and then the CF, that stood for a Mark 6, a Mark 6 artist special or custom artist, as well as a Mark 7. So the CF is the unusual one. And I'll just say a little about the Mark 6 artist special. I don't know a lot about it other than they were trying to make a fancier Mark 6 for a little while. So they made a few Mark 6 artist specials, and then they transformed it to a Mark 7. So I don't know exactly why they did that, but I do know that they only made 10 Mark 7s. And the Mark 7s are also different because they're a longer scale length. They're 26¼ inches, whereas all the rest are 25½ inches. I do not know what the scale length for a Mark 6 artist special is, but they did make a few of them as well, as you can see from the labels. All right, here's just a slide on quantities and prices based on my experiences over reviewing a lot of eBay, Reverb, Craigslist, and Facebook marketplace type listings over the years. And as far as quantities, I estimate they made about 13,700 and some Guild Mark classical guitars over those years. The most common ones you'll see for sales still are a Mark II and a Mark III. To a lesser extent, you'll see Mark I's and IVs for sale. You very rarely you'll see a Mark V or a Mark VI for sale, but you will once in a while. And the Mark 7s, I've never seen an active sale listing for them. Yeah, but you can see the quantities there of how I estimate based on serial numbers and date coding how many were made. This spreadsheet here just shows some measurements I took on the classical guitars that I've owned. I've had the ability, or at least the fun experience of owning 17 different Guild Mark classical guitars so far. So I took measurements on some, I weighed some of them, just kept track of some of their measurements, and here you can see some of that information from the Mark 1s all the way to the Mark 7s. The only thing I want to say really is the Westerly Rhode Island examples tended to be heavier built than the Hoboken, New Jersey ones. And I don't know exactly why. I've read different things, but the Hoboken, New Jersey ones were more lighter builds, maybe a little more resonant, some people say that as well. But they're all fun to play. Yeah, so here this slide shows different Guild guitars as well that I've been able to own over the years, different acoustics as well. And most of the dreadnoughts I've played were really well built Westerly Rhode Island examples as well. They're heavily built. But I did have a 74 Guild D40 for some time as well, which was a lot of fun to play. I even owned an old 1959 Ghost Label F30 for a little while, which was really a fun guitar. You can see the label there as a Ghost Label, which they only made them in 1959 and 1960. So, but this was a really sweet old acoustic guitar. This slide just shows a story of what happened to one old Guild Mark II that got destroyed. So some of these Guild Mark Classicals you'll never see again. This is just a slide on some literature in my collection at one point back in 2020. Some catalog pages from the 60s and 70s and 80s. Some more catalog pages. It's interesting. The Mark 2, 3, 4, and 5 were the most longest made guitars. The other ones were discontinued much earlier. All right, so that pretty much concludes my presentation. I just wanted to quote something from Emilio Pujol's guitar book, where he talks about, uh, just as certainly as the best qualities of an instrument shine or grow pale according to the hands which play it, he writes, so there is no doubt that a good guitar will always provide the best conditions necessary for perfect execution. And I really think the Guild classical guitars offer a lot of these features. And that was the intent of this presentation. Things like playability, brightness, bass, timbre, I guess they call it, resonance, sustain, and tone, sound, are all qualities I think that the Guild Mark classical guitars, they built that into them. That's what they provide. And so I hope this presentation format helps people get a little more knowledgeable about the Guild classical guitars, and maybe even some will pick one up to play. Here again is me with my youngest son holding my Mark III, which is kind of a cool picture. Thanks a lot. I hope you enjoyed this presentation.